Okay, so let's start. I am Quentin Roset. I'm Project and Communication Manager at Heva. And I'm very pleased to welcome you to this brand new Heva webinar in partnership this time with SG Consulting. I see that many of you are connected, so thank you very much for joining us. Today, our goal will be, for those who do not know the French data well, to familiarize you with the French healthcare data and to illustrate how they can facilitate specific stages of access to the health technologies market. So as an introduction, Jean-Cédric Glaise, who is a project manager at Heva, will remind us of the typology of these databases, what they contain, the access process, and their strengths and limitations. Then Isabelle Faux, Market Access and Economic Affairs Director at SG Consulting, will give perspective to what the French health data can bring to you using some various concrete use cases. Please do not hesitate to ask your questions in the Q&A tool in Zoom at the bottom of the screen. We will take the time to read them at the end. At the end of the presentation. Before getting to the heart of the matter, I will now give the floor to Alexandre Weinstock, Director of Heva, who will pass to Sylvia Germain, Director of SG Consulting, to say a few words about our activities and involvement using this French healthcare data. Alexandre, it's up to you.
Thank you, Quentin. Hello, everybody. I'm very glad to be here today for this new webinar. Firstly, I would like to thank my colleagues of Heva and SG Consulting to have prepared this webinar focused on French healthcare claims data applied to market access strategy for health technologies. I'm Alex Weinstock. I'm a pharmacist and health economist, and I'm the co-founder of Heva, which was created in 2005. So a few words on Heva. Heva was a forerunner in the analysis of French care health claim data as early as 2005 with the analysis of PMSE hospital data, and then in 2017 with the Turin law that promoted the opening of SNIRAM data to all public and private actors. Currently, Heva has a wide panel of expertise with its 35 employees, so data manager, biostatistician, data scientist, medical writer, and for the IT department, a web and iOS developer and UX designer. With this wide team, I always say that our company has a triple DNA. In addition to our expertise in health data analysis, we are constantly looking for innovative analysis tools, either through advanced, with advanced statistics methods and artificial intelligence tools. And we are constantly looking for ways to make the results accessible to non-experts through data visualization tools. I will now give the floor to Sylvia, who will present SG Consulting before the show begins. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. So nice to meet you via this webinar, and thank you very much to Alexandre and his team from Heva for this initiative. First, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Sylvia Germain. I am the president and the founder of the SG Consulting based in Paris. I created this company there 5 years ago to help manufacturers in the market access reimbursement processes of the healthcare technologies. We provide assistance for LPPR registration, is a positive list in France, derogatory and transitory reimbursement for innovative technologies, Article 51 and C1 on the different process. Of course, we manage and can help the manufacturer. We met several success with the forfait innovation for innovative technologies. During a strategic analysis, we propose assistance to define value proposition and optimize landscape of assessments. In terms of operational phase, we manage different several operation of files, sorry, and we elaborate also budget impact model. This is a very strong support to negotiate with the reimbursement tariff and sale price with the Ministry of Health, for example, or other payers. In terms of public affairs, we build stakeholder mapping. We proceed with key opinion leader interviews and set up our advisory board. We support companies with HTA appel preparation to defend the project. We also provide assistance with regulatory affairs during a protocol, clinical protocol, for example, during the forfait innovation, with submission of ethical committees and competent authorities. And also we manage interaction with hospital regarding the sole agreement preparation. And my colleague, Isabelle Faux, Director of Market Access Economic Affairs, will present interest to contribution for France healthcare data with several particular scales. See you later. Okay, thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. So we'll now, I will now present to, and yeah, good morning, everyone. And I will now present to you the French healthcare claims databases. So the three main databases that we use and that could be useful for you that are regrouped in the SNDS, the National Health Data System. The first database is the PMSI, which regroups information about hospital stays, hospitalization. What do we have in these databases? We have information about the patients, the age of the patient, the sex, the place of residency. We have some information about the diagnosis, the reasons for the hospitalization, but also diagnosis that can occur during the stays. And these are coded using international codification developed by the WHO, the ICD-10 codes. We have also information about the procedures that are done during the stay using a French codification, the CCIM. And we have information about the expensive drugs and devices that are given to the patient during the stay. Then we also have information about the stay itself, so the length of stay, of course, and also how the patient, well, did the patient arrive through the emergency ward or not? Where did the patient go at the end of the stay? Did he go back home or to another hospital or other cases? And also whether the patient went through specific units, such as the ICU, for example. We also have information about costs, because this database, the primary use of this database is for the French National Health Insurance to follow the activity of the hospital and to pay the hospital. So we have the actual costs that was paid by the National Health Insurance. We can also see the costs that what it actually costs to the hospital, which can be a bit different, but either way, it's what was actually paid, what it actually costs in real life. And finally, we have the information about death occurring in the hospital. On the other hand, what we don't have, unfortunately, we won't have information about intra-DRG drugs and devices. This means that some drugs and devices won't be billed separately, but are included in the cost of the stays and the procedures. Basically, what we have is that generally we have the expensive drugs and devices. And secondly, we won't have the clinical and biological results. We will know whether an exam was done, whether biological, radiological, for example, and which one was done, but we won't have the results. On the left side, we also have the DCIR, so the outpatient healthcare consumption data, so which regroups all the reimbursed care happening outside of the hospital. So we once again have information about the patients. We will have every reimbursed drugs and devices that will be given to the patient acquired through the community pharmacies. We will have the physician consultation with information about the specialty of the physician and the location of the physician. We'll have information about long-term disease. The long-term disease is a classifications from the National Health Insurance in France that opens enhance reimbursement rights for the patient when a patient suffers of a long-term disease, and we will know which long-term disease it is. Once again, we have costs because again, this database, the first use is to follow the reimbursed care. So, and once again, it will be what was actually paid by the French National Insurance. And finally, we'll have information about death occurring both in and out of the hospital. What we don't have are non-reimbursed care. So for example, self-medication. And we won't have, once again, the clinical and biological results, although we will know whether an exam was done or not. And the third database I want to present to you today is the CPDC, which is based on the death certificates. In French, each time someone dies, a physician will do a death certificate giving the cause of death. And it can be quite precise and really give the actual cause of death. For example, if a patient has cancer, most of the time the cause of death won't be the cancer, but really what caused the death, for example, embolism or stuff like that. And this is done once again using the international ICD-10 codification. What is very interesting with those databases is that they are linked together. Which means we can follow the patient both through time and space. So this means that, for example, if we identify a patient in hospital with a diagnostic, a procedure, or a device that was implanted, for example, we'll be able to follow him both when he comes back to the hospital, so during time, and also during space, which means we will be also able to follow him outside of the hospital when he goes to a physician, to a community pharmacy, and see his treatments along the time. And of course, until death also. And those three databases are the foundation of the Health Data Hub, which regroups those databases. And they also want to enrich the catalog of available databases during time. So quick glance at the strengths and limits of those databases. The first strength of those databases is that it's an exhaustive database of the French population covered by the National Health Insurance, which means we can follow approximately 68 million of insured French people, and it's therefore a true representation of the French population. We also have a completeness of the medical care and the expenditures that go with them, both in primary care, so out of the hospital, and during hospitalization, both in public and private institutions. We won't have problem with recall bias limitations as everything is recorded in real time. And once again, there is a use of standardized data. I talked to you about a few of the codes that are used in those databases. And finally, I told you that those databases are linked together or matched together, but it's also possible to match them with other databases, with clinical studies or with registries to enrich the data. Of course, there are some limitations. So we are limited to reimbursed care, which means we won't have self-medications. We won't have the prescriptions that are not followed by dispensation, and we won't know whether or not the patient actually took the treatment. We won't have, once again, the result of clinical or preclinical examinations. And for the hospital part, we won't be able to identify intra-DRG treatments, which means we will basically have only the expensive drugs and devices. So now, how can you access those databases? The first one, the PMSI, so the hospital database, the access is through a simplified procedures following the reference methodology. So the first step is that the industrial, so the device manufacturer, has to declare itself compliant with this methodology with the French CNIL. Then they have to sign use agreements. And once this is done, for each study has to be registered on the Health Data Hub website. And this is it. There is no review of the study, no ethical committee. And actually, the first two steps are only have to be done once. And once the industrial is compliant with this methodology, then for the next studies, the only step that has to be done is just the registration on the website, which means for the first study, usually it's 1 month to access the data, and for the subsequent study, it's nearly instant. You have an instant access. Then, of course, the next step is the realization of the study. And the last step, which is common for all the study on those databases, is that there has to be a communication of the results. The first communication of the results is only to the Health Data Hub, which means it's confidential. It's only an information about the results of the study to the Health Data Hub. And on the other hand, they also ask for public communication of the results, as those are public databases. And it has to be done within the 3 years of the end of the study. And the format is quite free because it can either be a scientific publication, poster, an intervention in a congress, and it doesn't have to be exhaustive also on the results. So the next database is the SNIRAM. So the SNIRAM is the information system that regroups the PMSI, hospital, DCIR, outpatient information, and the CPDC. So the first step is to form a scientific committee. Well, this is something that is advised because it's very interesting to have some clinical experts, or it can be other experts, it can be health economics experts also, but to have them on board to help draft the protocol and ensure that the protocol will be relevant from a clinical point of view. Then there is a submission that is done through the Health Data Hub, and this time there is the CESRES, which is an ethical committee that will review the methodology and give an opinion on this methodology. Then there is a few regulatory steps, and all of this makes that usually it takes 7 to 9 months to access the data, including the protocol drafting with the scientific committee. And once again, we have the analysis and finally the publication of the results. Another database that I didn't talk about is the EGB, which is the general sample of beneficiaries, which means it's actually a sample, 1/97th sample of the French population. So we have the same information than in the SNIRAM, so both outside and inside the hospital, but with only a sample of the French population. And what is interesting is that it's a simplified procedure. This time the scientific committee is mandatory because there will be no review of the protocol by an ethics committee. And this allows the process to be much quicker. So to summarize, those are the different type of data, the main type of data that we have that you have access. The first one that we didn't talk yet is the open data. So those are databases that are accessible to anyone on the internet, and they are only aggregated data, but they can already provide useful information on drugs used in France, procedures and diagnosis. And they can be used for market and sales analysis, especially because there are no restriction on the use of those databases. Of course, it's an immediate access, and at Heva, we developed some tools to query those databases more easily than the raw open access databases, and also compare between treatments, between centers, stuff like that. Then we have the PMSI, the hospital data. So as we said, it's 1 month or afterwards, it's even an immediate access, and it can be used for target population identification, profiling, treatment sequences. The EGB, so the sample of the French population, so it's representative on age and gender of the French population, but not necessarily on the diseases. So the access is much quicker than the SNERAM, around 3 to 4 months, including the protocol drafting, and it can be used for disease burden study, patient pathway, patient profiling, and treatment sequence. And finally, the SNERAM, which regroups the DCRA, PMSI, and CPDC. So around 7 to 9 months to access the data, including the protocol and scientific committee. And it can be used basically for anything, target population, patient pathway, etc. So I will now let Isabelle present to you some example of the use of the French healthcare claims databases. Thank you. Isabelle, you're on mute. Sorry.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you very much, Jean-Cédric. So here we would like to share with you some cases to provide you some examples which on the use of the healthcare data. And this is very helpful, you know, to integrate that in our market access strategy. So first of all, First of all, we want to share with you the fact that during the product life cycle, you can use and capitalize on the healthcare data at very early stage to understand the patient population, the potential target population, the treatment, and the use of different health technologies. So at very early stage, and just after, you know, for Forfait Innovation, and I will cover this topic just after with an example, PHRC, which is a hospital program for clinical research, during PRME, which is a clinical program for health economic, or during, you know, the very new decree that was provided in 2021 for accès précoce, early access. So, you know, for all this type of dossier or clinical studies, it's very important that to have in mind that this could provide a very wide understanding of the disease, of the treatment, patient pathway, patient population. And this is based on the extraction of the open data, PMSI and SNDS. Then when you have covered this very early stage, we used to go into the SNDS data for the reimbursement dossier, you know, for the LPPR application and registration, sorry. So here, what we will use, you know, it's for LPPR dossier as well as the creation of a medical procedure. So again, identifying target population in the very specific indication of your technology, a specific patient profile, subgroup population. It's a way to get data and to have a full understanding on your potential comparator and having a broad understanding on the healthcare, the impact on healthcare organization. And more, you know, we are setting up budget impact model and have an analysis on the cost associated. And in some cases, you know, when you have potentially an expensive medical clinical technologies, sorry, you have to provide a health economic assessment. So again, the data will be useful to fulfill your dossier. The last stage is the post-commercialization, because again, after the commercialization, you can provide to the HTA bodies, which are the HAS in France, Haute Autorité de Santé, and they are very eager, you know, with all the real-world evidence that you can extract from the SNDS, having in mind that you can extract this data as well as linkage with the registry or post-clinical study. One example with the forfait innovation and with the technology YCTR, which obtained its forfait innovation in 2019. Just very quickly for you to have in mind, and we wanted to recap, you know, the eligible criteria which are cumulative. So the first one is, of course, the innovation degree. And when we say innovation, that is not an incremental improvement, but a real innovation. Being at the very early stage of the diffusion, which means that you have data, and with this data, you can characterize the risk with your technology, but you don't have sufficient data to require LPP registration or ask for reimbursement. So, you know, it's a balance between having too much and not too much. The thing is that during the forfait innovation, you will have to conduct a clinical study that will be normally should be aligned with the expectation of the HAS. Evaluate the risk characterization. So this should have been made during the preclinical and preliminary clinical results. And the last criteria is one of those. It's on one side, you can demonstrate that there is a high and uncovered medical need, okay, which is most of the time the cases in the forfait innovation that have been published. Or you can demonstrate that you have a very great impact on the healthcare cost and healthcare expenses. So this is just a quick reminder of the eligibility criteria. Regarding WISE, you know, is an implant, for cardiac resynchronization, and it was a very, very high new technology, a breakthrough technology to deliver pacing stimulation, you know, in the left ventricular. And again, as I said, it was an implant. So the indication is to treat some very specific heart failure. Regarding the different eligibility criteria, so why it was an innovation, it was because there is absolutely no other comparable mode of action which have the equivalence in the indication. So when you require and when you have innovation, you need to have in mind that it is for the claim indication in regarding, of course, your mode of action. WISE was at the very early stage of the diffusion data because they have 3 feasibility studies. With these studies, they could characterize the risk. And again, they really covered an unmet medical need because there were no comparative technology which cover this indication. So how we use, you know, the health data, from SNDS. Here, this is an example of the use of PMSI and CPDC. The first thing is we use to identify what are the medical procedure where your technology will be used. So this is the first step, and it's a great indication to know how much your technology is linked with a medical procedure. So here we identify 3 codes, you know, and you have the description in front of these codes. Having in mind that when you identify the medical procedure, potentially you can have the resource needed and the associated cost. So again, you know, in PMSI data, this can provide very fruitful and additional data that you need to have the understanding of the technology and the context of your technology. So with this medical procedure, we have identified, so the number of procedures, sorry, and we made the assumption of that the number of procedure correspond to the exact number of the patient. This is an assumption, and Alexander would say that this is not accurate. That's right, because again, it is better to use the linkage because it's there is sometimes, you know, and there is normally more procedure than patients, but here we made the assumption that the patient will occur only one procedure. How we use the CPDC, again, the CPDC is very useful to provide information regarding the rate of mortality. And here you see what is really interesting is that this covers a very long period of time because this covers 13 years. So it's a way to describe, you know, the epidemiologic data and to follow, you know, the trend of the mortality rate. And on the right side, on the right side, you can have the same, on the same period of time, you know, the rate of hospitalized patient for cardiac insufficiency. So this was the first example with a forfait innovation. And the second example will be, you know, how we use this data in a LPPR dossier, so a registration for reimbursement. And I will take as an example a very recent example, which is Impella 5.0. So quickly, what is Impella 5.0? You know, it provides a mechanical assistance for the left heart within 10 days. So it's for, the indication is for refractory cardiogenic shock and for the dysfunction of the left ventricle. And the objective here, you know, it's a very small pump here, so that, and you will, you know, increase the cardiac flow, and very important, you will maintain the organ perfusion and decreasing at the same time the overload of the left ventricles and the stays in the lung. So what is really, really important is that you avoid, of course, a multi-organ dysfunction, increase renal and hepatic function, and avoid hypoxemia. So quickly, I want to give you a context because, you know, again, it was a breakthrough technology, and the potential comparator could be ECMO, you know, extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. Because sometimes when you have a very innovative technology like Impella, you need to find a proxy to identify what are the most relevant medical procedure to have this understanding on the disease. So the thing is that sometimes, and this is a good example, you know, ECMO has very broad indication, really broader than the post-cardiotomic cardiogenic shock. But it was the most appropriate proxy, and you will see how we used it. So the two top objectives of the studies that we have set up was first, obtain data on the survival rate at the first day of hospitalization at 30 days, 60 days, and 1 year for adult patients receiving ECMO. Again, as the technology has been not yet launched, we have the data of the ECMO and not with Impella, but we will have the data, we hope, now with Impella. And the second objective was to quantify Impella 5.0, the target population, which match again with the indication and this more narrow indication than the one with ECMO. So in terms of methodology, how we did that, so we identified the cardiogenic shock in the ICD-10, okay, that was mentioned previously by Cedric. And then we chain the number of patients with the index of the beginning of the journey. And with all of the state of this patient, then we can extract the first day, the 30 days, 60 days, and 1 year. So on the left side here, you can see that we have the data for how many patients were at the day of hospitalization were alive and the number of whom were dead. And that at 30 days, 60 days, and 1 year after. So this was very helpful to have the understanding of the rate of mortality with the patient compared to what was in the clinical data of Impella 5.0. And here on the second part, on the results, you see that how many patients has been identified, more than 9,000 patients. And finally, in our indication, you know, we could have identified the number of the patient that receiving that post-cardiogenic shock have an open heart surgery. So you can see how we narrow, you know, step by step, the population of the indication. The last part of my example is how to assess the target population. And again, you know, it's how to be more precise and how to narrow this target population. And so here you can see that we start with the number of patients undergoing a cardiac surgery with cardiogenic shock, and the number of patients identified was 2,950 for patients with less than 65 years old. And we can identify the patient with absolute contraindication, with patients that develop a cardiogenic shock before cardio surgery. And then we could land on the most relevant target population. And it's interesting because we provide this methodology in our dossier. HAS did not follow this methodology. They have used some publications, you know, and they land on the same number of patients. So sometimes it's interesting, you know, to set up the comparison with what is available in the literature in terms of epidemiologic data and what you can extract and obtain with the SNDS data. And we made, you know, and of course, the patient that are cardiogenic shock is not the patient with, unfortunately, less than 60 years old, but are much more older. And when we make the same analysis without this limit of age, we have landed with 1,295 patients. And this is very important as well to have this identification, because for your future discussion with the economic committee, you know, you are supposed to be, and your technology is supposed to be in the relevant indication. But sometimes, you know, the frontier of the age, is sometimes very, very small. And it's important to evaluate this potential target population in addition for the discussion, and saying that perhaps, you know, there is a possibility that your technology could be used for older patients. And the last here example is, and this is very important, and this is one of the key message as well, is in France, HTA bodies, the HAS, for them, you know, these health data are very compelling and very accurate. So they use it themselves. And so here again, in the opinion, you know, they extract some PMSI data. They have defined another methodology, and they have extract the number of cardiac surgery stays. So with these two examples, again, it's very important to have in mind that you can extrapolate data and you can enrich your dossier with data. And I will let Jean-Cédric presenting the last example. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabelle. So for the last example, it's a post-inscription study that was done on Zenith dissection. So an endovascular graft The context was that this graft needed a renewal of the reimbursement approval. So with the through the CNEDIMS body of the HAS, and the CNEDIMS requested a follow-up study in real-life condition of use, and they wanted to document specific endpoints: the short-term mortality, neurological complication, technical complication linked to the stent, and long-term complication beyond 5 years following the implantation. So at first, a clinical study was planned, and a database study in the SNDS alongside the clinical study was also decided. And this is something that was discussed with the manufacturer and with the HAS and with Heva about the possibility and the relevance of using SNDS claims data to document those endpoints. And as you can see, so following the objective, the short-term mortality, this is something that we have in the database, both for death occurring in and outside of the hospital. The complications were followed mainly through ICD-10 codes during hospitalization, although some complication can also be followed through treatment deliveries outside of the hospital, or sometimes it could be also inside the hospital. The technical complications were followed using procedure codes. So for the conversion to open surgery, it was the actual procedure, the surgery codes. And for some complications, it was by looking at the procedures used to alleviate those complications. And finally, they wanted some long-term information. And with the SNDS, we have data available since 2006, which means we can follow the patients again through time and space. And for a long time, both on a retrospective point of view, so and also on a prospective point of view, and we can even have studies that are updated along the years for several years as and allows us to follow the patient. And so this was something that was validated by the HAS. And one thing that was also very interesting for this study is that the target population was really small, around 140 people, which means it was very difficult for using a conventional clinical study to capture all of those patients. Whereas using those databases, we were able to identify all implantations occurring in France. So I will let Isabelle present you the final key takeaway.
So as you can see, and following our presentation, you see that SNDS is a really unique database to analyze and set up studies, research, or make any assessment of healthcare data. It provides very important information to implement, of course, healthcare policies and to improve the knowledge of health expenditures in general. We advise to, yes, anticipate at very early stage in your strategic analysis the data that you will require, because as you have seen, there is various delay in the process to extract the SNDS data. It fulfills the HAS expectation in terms of real-world evidence. It provides a very global understanding and a great overview for patient pathway, hospital stays, target population. And now you have the opportunity, to link SNDS and registration for the renewal of your registration. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Isabelle and Jean-Cédric. Just for those who asked, the replay will be available on YouTube on Heva channel, and the slides can be sent, of course, on request. So we are about to start our Q&A session. Thank you very much for all your questions. First question from Bernard. Will the PMSI show rates of readmission and the cost of readmission after a particular procedure? I think Jean-Cédric, maybe we can talk about the proxy we can make with.
Sure. Yes. So indeed, we can follow rates of readmissions and also the cost. So using the PMSI only, once we have identified the patients that have this particular procedure, so using CCM codes, or it can be using the device code if it's an implantable device, we will be able to follow them and see all the future, the subsequent hospitalization and the costs. And also we can narrow it down and only look maybe at specific hospitalization using the diagnostic codes to if we want to look at specific hospitalization for example for follow-up specific procedures or complications.
Thank you, Jean-Cédric. A second one was, you said that it is possible to follow the patient's care pathway, but aren't the data supposed to be pseudonymized or anonymized? Alexandre, maybe you want to say a word about that.
Okay, thank you, Quentin. So yes, all the data we work on are totally pseudonymized. So they are constituted by the social security number, but after procedure, it was pseudonymized. But we are an ID number which permit to follow the patient in time and space, and so we can follow him during the time in all his care pathway, so either in hospital or in ambulatory care. And it's why, as JC said, that the strength of this database is the possibility to link hospital database and ambulatory care database.
Thank you. Thank you, Alexandre. Does exist other health database like data brokers?
I'm not sure to understand
this question. What is data brokers?
Data brokers, yeah.
There was another question, perhaps it was similar, regarding other database relating to clinical or biological results available. We try to present you the SNDS database. So it was a historical database managed by the French health system. Currently, in the Health Data Hub, we are waiting for the publication of the catalog of new database that we can link with the historical SNDS. So if there is an hospital which have a registry with clinical or biological data regarding, I don't know, thoracic procedures, for example, we can submit a file to access to this data linked to the SNDS database and to conduct a specific study on how this database linked. I hope I was clear.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Alexandre. Question from Arnaud. For early product lifecycle or early stage startups, time to results is key as well as cost. Are there ways to reduce cost of access to SNDS for this type of companies?
So I don't know, perhaps. So yes, of course, we really understand this question, and it's very important because you really need to have clearly in mind the resource needed to conduct these studies. The way to reduce cost and to access to SNDS, or the access to SNDS, as you have seen previously, depending on the procedures, it's on open data or not. So the first step is, do you have, are the data that you would like to identify, are they in the open database? If not, that means that perhaps you need to go through other more the PMSI or EGB, for example. And then yes, it's you have to ask for perhaps a quotation, but for sure you need to anticipate that. I don't know. I know that it's not a full complementary answers, but I don't know, Alexander. Perhaps you have a rows interval of what is the quotation needed for this type of analysis?
I'm not sure to understand.
The budget, sorry, needed for this type of analysis. It's very large, you know. That,
yes, it's very large. It's not easy to answer. I will try for PMSI analysis. For example, target population, approximately, I could say perhaps 20,000 euro. But for SNDS study, so SNIRAM or EGB, as JC showed you, there is a lot of early procedure to submit, to write a protocol, to submit in, and after that to conduct the study. And it's, from my experience, it's never under 100,000 euro for an SNS study. After, to be more precise, we have to know what is the objective. It depends on the quantity of analysis. So my estimation.
Okay, thank you. Another question was about the open data. Can you please clarify again what is in the open data? Is it PMSI subsample or ambulatory care information?
So on the open data, you have it's not a sample, it's aggregated data, which means you won't be able to identify a patient and follow him, but you will have aggregated data, so about consumption of drugs, consumption, use of procedures, diagnostics, but you will have aggregated data on the national level, regional, and even departmental level. And you will also, for some databases, have information about on the center, on the hospital level. Yeah, and that's it. But it's the main thing is that it's aggregated, which means, and this is why it can be in open data. You can't be able to identify patient, and therefore there is no risk in terms of anonymity.
Thank you, Jean-Cédric. Next one, is it possible to combine SNDS with data from other countries, in particular for rare diseases? Are there comparable structures?
So I'm not sure we can combine SNDS with data from other countries, but we can compare. Currently, we have an experience to work on linkage for with SNDS and the national database of rare disease. This database will be included in the catalog of Health Data Hub in the next month. We hope before the end of the year. So after this study, we can compare with other data from other countries, but we cannot combine directly SNDS with a database from other countries. I will answer to the other question of Arnaud regarding any innovative or fast track. There is not a real fast track procedure for a new inscription, but during the submission of the file to Health Data Hub, we can focus and emphasize that the file is very important because the health authorities are waiting for new data in real world evidence. So, but there is not fast track. Perhaps for how do you say in English? To follow product in real world evidence. For example, vaccine. Perhaps if we want to conduct a study on SNIRAM data to assess the risk with a product, perhaps we can have a fast track, but there is no a real procedure.
Thank you. In case of the first listing, I think it's a question for Isabelle. In case of a first listing of a MD on LPPR, do you know the degree of acceptability from the French authorities about hybrid comparative studies? Studies combining both a clinical arm and an arm based on LW real-world evidence source like claims database?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I would say that what you really need, if you can provide, is a randomized control trials. You know, and there is a range of clinical evidence which is expected from HAS. I would say that providing this type of analysis with a combination of clinical and real-world evidence, it's not your dossier should not be based only on this type of study. It should be in complementary with additional clinical study that you have conducted, having in mind that what is first expected is you know, a clinical study that compared your technology to your relevant comparator, taking into account what are the standard of care in France. And again, when you use, for example, this type of studies, you know, with an historical, for example, historical arm based on literature review, it's only if there is no option at all. And you have to demonstrate that there is no options. So I will say not only this, but in complementary.
Thank you, Isabelle. And
just to complete the answer of Isabelle, from our experience, either for drugs or medical device, the acceptability from the French authorities is very good. If you are very clear on the methodology, the strengths and limits. But as JC presented before, these databases are exhaustive, so there is a lot of strengths, and it's very interesting for health authorities to have such data.
Thank you, Alexandre. I think we received a clarification about the question on the data brokers. This question was asking if there exists other types of health database like private database you can buy, for example. I think we can speak about CGDIM database, for example,
or IQVIA.
Or IQVIA database. So yeah, basically, there's a lot of other private database in France, particularly based on sales on pharmacy sales in France that you can buy pretty easily, but for a huge cost generally.
And those databases generally are not exhaustive on the whole population, because the data gathering is not done using all of the national health insurance system.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, everyone, for these great presentations. I think we answer all the questions you had. Don't forget to follow us on social media, and we will be able to send you the replay of the presentation. See you next time for a new webinar, I hope.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Quentin? Quentin?
Oui.
On a prévu de faire un tout petit débrief ou pas avec Isabelle et Sylvia? Rapide?
Ouais, on attend que...
J'ai vu qu'il restait encore un peu de monde. Bon, je me déconnecte et j'attends que tu me relances. Ok?
ouais.